Welcome to Milspouse Matters, the podcast dedicated to encouraging military spouses. Need some inspiration as you navigate military life, moves, deployments, raising military kids, keeping your marriage together, career issues, and more? Get an encouraging, humorous outlook from a spouse who's been there for 30 years. Join host Jen McDonald, author of You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse, who knows that we're stronger together. Jen also writes regularly for outlets such as Milspouse Magazine and has been featured in numerous books and national publications. Grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and sit back and relax as Jen talks with military spouses both new and experienced who will give you realistic hope and support for your own Milspouse journey.
Everybody, and welcome to this episode of Milspouse Matters. I'm Jen McDonald. I'm so glad to welcome you back to the podcast. I hope your week is going great wherever in the world this finds your military family. Just a reminder, please subscribe on whatever podcast app you're using. Your subscribes and reviews help us get the stories of military families in front of even more listeners. And I hope you'll connect with Milspouse Matters on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to stay updated on what's coming. You can find show notes, links to past episodes on milspousematters.com, where you can just click on the podcast tab for easy buttons to subscribe, listen to all the past episodes, get information on how to be a guest, and more. This is also my author site, and it has loads of resources for military spouses, including a free deployment devotional, Bible verses for spouses going through deployment or other issues with military life, and more information. And on Facebook, you can join the Christian Military Spouses Facebook group, where we support each other, take prayer requests, share what's going on in our week, and make some connections there. Today, I'm going to be talking to Lizann Lightfoot, a Marine Corps spouse who's been through 7 different deployments and 5 PCS moves, including one overseas to Europe. She's a busy mom to 4 kids, ages 4 to 10. She writes as the seasoned spouse to encourage other military spouses and loved ones through deployments and challenges of military life. And we are talking all about communication during deployment with your spouse, whether you're a brand new spouse or a more, quote, seasoned spouse. And I think that you're going to really like this discussion. We talk about things that you can do about managing expectations, what to expect maybe during deployment with communication, and even some tips of how to stay connected. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Thanks for joining me. So hello, everybody, and welcome to Lizann. I'm so happy to be talking with you today.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here.
Yay. So listeners may know you online as the seasoned spouse, but for those who aren't familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Lizann, and I do go by the seasoned spouse. I've been writing as that blog owner for a few years now. But before all that, I was a Marine Corps wife and mom to 4 kids. And I've been with my Marine for, 18 years now.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And together we've been through 7 deployments, and we are on our 5th duty station. So that's my Milspouse resume there.
And you've written a book, right?
I did.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I wrote my first book about our overseas duty station, which was Rota, Spain. Mm-hmm. And we were so lucky to be stationed there for 3 years. It's a wonderful place to live, but moving overseas definitely has its challenges. And I started collecting stories and experiences of things that would make the PCS move a little bit easier, and also places to explore once you've moved there locally. Everybody wants to know about the culture and the food and day trips. And I started collecting all of that and ended up publishing a book in 2014, and it's called Welcome to Rota.
Right. And so obviously everything she talks about that you can find online, we'll link to it in the show notes. And so that's such a good idea, because is that one of those duty stations, and I don't know, that doesn't have base housing, or like where most people live off base there?
It does have base housing, but it's a small community, and so a lot of people do choose to live off base. And there's just an overwhelming amount of decisions that you need to make about schools, because there's a lot more school options. You can actually go to public Spanish school for free, and just things like that you won't know automatically when you're preparing for your move, that people are always asking, how do I do this? Where can I go for that? And it turns out that it's, this little tiny locally owned Spanish shop will take care of that for you. But it takes so long to get adjusted and to learn all that.
Yeah. And what's been the response to your book? I'm sure it's so helpful to people.
It has been wonderful. I mean, I never wrote it planning for it to be a bestseller. It's definitely tailored for that duty station, but I have had such positive feedback that families are saying, thank you so much. We needed this. This helped tremendously with our move. It helped us feel settled faster. And it really just helps people maximize their overseas experience.
Yes, that's so helpful. You can use the military sites, but having that insider look of someone that's been there and can tell you those little things, that's amazing, I think, for any military family. So that's great. Now, for you, were you raised military at all? Did you have any background in the military before you became a spouse?
No, not at all. I think I knew one military kid in high school, and I went to her house on base a couple times, and we were all sort of in culture shock, like, what's going on? Why is everything so strange? Why are we doing the national anthem at the movie theater?
And I grew up in a military town too. And I remember, like you're saying, going to base housing. Number one, I didn't know what it was. Number two, I remember thinking, what is all this stuff? They had like screens from Japan and then like a cuckoo clock. And I thought, this is just different. Right? It's a different culture for sure. So you just kind of got thrown into it when you got married then, like a lot of us.
I was dating a man who had not even talked about the military. He was actually going to go into the police department. And then plans shifted, and next thing I know, he's talking to a Marine recruiter. And we dated for several years while he was going through boot camp, and then his initial assignments were right after September 11th. And so he deployed very rapidly 3 times in a row to Iraq, which was mostly while I was in college. And so it was just a very tumultuous time trying to figure out being a military girlfriend and the future prospect of being a military wife and dealing with these deployments and combat and everything all at once. Definitely a lot to adjust to.
It sure is. And then you said you guys have lived in several different places. Do you have a favorite duty assignment so far?
Well, we loved Spain.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to top that one.
Well, and then when did you decide to become, make this site the seasoned spouse and kind of make that your brand?
It was after we had moved from Spain to California, and I'd already published my book. So I was kind of in the mode of helping military families and answering questions and wanting to be a helpful resource. And I came to our Pendleton, is the California base that we moved to, which is a huge base, lots of young Marine families. And people seem to be surprised and very interested in my experiences. And I didn't think that I had done anything really special. Yes, we'd been stationed overseas once, but, lots of people do that. And we'd been through a few deployments, but obviously lots of people do that. So I didn't think my experience was unique, but people started asking me questions like, you've been through this before. How do I do this? We're getting ready for our first deployment. What should I expect? What can I do? And I realized that all of those experiences were useful to someone, and I wanted to start sharing the seasoned perspective of military life and use it as a resource that would be helpful to younger, newer families.
That's great. And I know when we kind of were nearing the 20-year mark, we'd go to things with the Air Force and they would call us the senior spouses, which everybody rejects that. That label. It's just not the most flattering, and kind of seasoned spouses became the thing we would say. So I think it's really interesting that you chose that as well, because it is kind of well known. What response have you had to that then, as far as your online presence?
It's been really interesting because I was actually a little bit hesitant to choose that as my title. I played around with, a few different names and brands. And at the time that I originally created my blog, I didn't feel all that seasoned as a spouse. We had dated for such a long time. We actually dated for 7 years, that we had only been married for about 9 years when I started the blog. And so 9 years is not, the longest military marriage of all time. So I was a little bit hesitant to say, oh, I'm the seasoned spouse.
Yeah.
But I think it's something that people can relate to, because the idea is not that, I'm the all-knowing, most knowledgeable spouse out there, but it's more the idea that everyone is seasoned in some way. And so everyone has an experience to share, whether that's a PCS move that went poorly or one that went very well, or whether it's living overseas, or whether it's different types of deployments. And so I've made a real effort to really collect different stories and different perspectives from other seasoned spouses and try to share those on my site as well.
You have done such a great job with that. And I think your website is a great collection of what you're talking about. So y'all go check it out, seasonspouse.com, tons and tons of resources. And I think that's so great that you say, you may not know the exact scenario, so you use other voices. And I believe that's so important, because just because I experience something some way doesn't mean that's going to be the same experience for a younger spouse. So you have to listen to lots of different people and kind of find what resonates with you. But like I said, you've done a great job of collecting those voices on your site. I'm so thankful for your presence online, honestly.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's been definitely a fun project, and it's been very fulfilling. And I've really enjoyed hearing other people's experiences, because obviously we've been Marine Corps the entire time, and he's done some Navy deployments, and we've lived on Navy bases, so I have a small amount of Navy exposure. But it's amazing sometimes to see the different ways that different branches do things, and different terminologies and terms
Definitely.
that are used. So it's always kind of eye-opening that you don't want to just get one person's experience. You want to hear a collective and then kind of pick and choose what's going to be most applicable to you.
Yes, especially bad ones, because those seem to be the ones that are most vocal. And so you kind of have to sift through that. It's like grading on a curve. You throw out the really bad stuff, you throw out the really crazy good stuff, and it's probably the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? For most of military life. So, yeah. Well, we're going to be talking about strengthening your marriage and communicating when your spouse is deployed. So I know that you focus on deployment resources and have been through a lot of deployments yourself. Now, did you mention that you'd been through deployments as both a girlfriend and a wife?
Yes, we did. His 3 as a girlfriend and then 4 as a wife.
Wow. So you have a lot of perspective on all of this. So for someone who's facing their first deployment, whether they are married yet, well, there's probably going to be 2 different types of advice. If you're, let's just talk about if you're married, and then we can talk about it's your significant other. If you're facing your first deployment, what ways can we keep our marriages strong? What tips do you have for that?
I think it obviously is going to depend a little bit on the couple themselves and what their current style of communication is. What works for one person might not work for another. But I think one thing that helped prepare my husband and I is that we had dated long distance for so long. Like I said, 7 years of long distance dating. That was because of college and because of deployments and various factors. But that meant that we got really good at letter writing and phone calls and leading our own separate lives, being used to being apart. And so in some ways, deployment, it's not easy for me. It's not fun. It's not something that I ever look forward to, but it is something that I know I can handle because I've done it before. Right. So I think when it's your first time, you don't have necessarily that reassurance. And so many couples have not spent any time apart. In the age of modern technology, we're used to daily communication and constant text messages. And that is something that can be a huge shock when preparing for deployment. So one thing I always tell people is to really discuss and manage your expectations of what the communication will be like, because it is different every deployment. So even if the service member has been through it before and he says, I'm sure I'll have email, or I should be able to call once a week or whatever, that could be based on previous experience and not on the current location. So you always have to be prepared that things might be different, things might change. But it's just important to get on the same page. Are you expecting 1 phone call per week? And is the other person expecting 1 phone call per day? Because that's going to cause a lot of tension.
Well, and I think one of the things that was said to me, since my husband's Air Force, people assumed he would be in a cushy location. They're like, well, at least you can FaceTime. We've never had a deployment where we could do video chat, ever.
Wow.
So, and part of it is because some of them were when we were much younger and there wasn't that option. But it was like, well, that's all well and good if you think that, but that's not actually our reality. I didn't see his face, we didn't.
Yeah, we never had that until last year, our 7th deployment. We finally had video calls.
Yeah.
And so we had been through so many with only letters and only care packages and occasional emails and things.
Yeah, yeah. Or a call.
But then there was, I think it was the 6th deployment. Obviously, we had been through this before, so you'd think as far as managing expectations that we'd be good at this by now. He's packing up his enormous pile of stuff, and I hand him a box of blank envelopes. And I said, well, here you go. And he said, what's this for? I'm like, well, so that you can write to me. And he said, oh, I won't need these because we're going to have email this time. I'm like, well, I'm glad we had that conversation so I wasn't sitting around waiting for a letter.
But, you can still send me letters. Those are still good to get.
I know. But I think that happens so often that, these unvoiced expectations that go unmet can be extremely troubling and stressful and frustrating. And it's not always somebody's fault. It's not that the service member is being lazy or not reciprocating or whatever, but when the expectations are not the same, it's very easy to fall into a trap of, blaming and jealousy and all kinds of negatives.
Or just thinking the worst. And that is such good advice, managing expectations. Our oldest son, just returned from an 8-month deployment. And so he did have his phone there, but Wi-Fi is once in a while. And I had some family members say, well, I texted him and he didn't answer. And I said, he may not have ever gotten it. And, that still carries over as far as even if they have the technology, don't just assume that they're able to get right back to you or even able to text. We're so, like you said, we're so used to just shooting off a text and expecting an answer.
Right. And I think it's hard not to take it personally as well, because sometimes when those messages do go unanswered, and I hear this all the time, people saying, well, I know he has internet because I've seen him on Facebook or I've seen him on Snapchat, but he's not responding to my messages. And it happens. And honestly, I think there is something that I call deployment mode. Maybe there's a more official psychological term for it, but I think when the service member gets into that deployment zone where, they are on a work schedule 24/7, and I think by default, they become a little bit self-centered. Their entire universe is right at that base where they're doing their job, And for whatever reason, it can be emotionally frustrating for them to reconnect to family back home. It can be painful and, make them homesick. So sometimes people just distance themselves and kind of tone down the communication. Or it can just be a time management issue that because of the time zones and because of their deployment schedule, they don't have the time to do video chats.
Right.
And I think it's really easy for the service member to be the one kind of holding all the keys to the communication. And sometimes they are not reaching out, and the spouse can feel really frustrated by, reaching out in every possible way and then feeling rejected or ignored or hurt.
That's great advice. Well, what else would you advise for marriages? So managing expectations, realizing the service member may be in deployment mode, which, I totally agree with that. They're very mission focused.
Yes.
And that's just part of it. What else would you say?
I also had a little bit of a breakthrough with my husband and I when we learned about the love languages. There's a book called The 5 Love Languages, and you can get it in a military version or in a regular. It's essentially the same. And the idea is that every person has a preferred way of communicating and a preferred way of feeling love. And this isn't necessarily something that you choose or you control. It has a lot to just do with your personality or your upbringing and what your expectations are. And when you realize that you and your partner may have a different love language, you realize that the things that are meaningful and fulfilling to you, the things that you're craving in your relationship, might not be the exact same things that your partner is craving.
Right.
And so for me, I'm a writer. And so words are definitely my love language. I love those letters and those emails and all of those things. They mean so much to me. My husband is not a writer.
Opposites attract, right?
Right. And so for him, of course, he loves receiving letters from me. And of course, that's, a meaningful gesture and it's appreciated. But what really fulfills him and what satisfies him is actually more gift giving and, of course, physical touch. So when I kind of learned that I could express to him the fact that I had that need, that, I need to hear words of affirmation. You might think it's silly. You might think it's, not necessary, but that's what I'm missing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I had to make an effort. I'm not a great gift giver. And so I had to kind of be a little bit more creative, thinking about things that would show meaning and affection and attention that I could send in a care package or get to him. And once we kind of realized that, it was a way of just kind of improving our relationship and improving our deployment connection so that we weren't both feeling empty and unfulfilled.
Mm-hmm. As far as advice for girlfriends or significant others, would they kind of be along the same lines as far as, managing expectations and communicating and looking at it from their perspective? Is it sort of the same advice, do you think?
I think a lot of that is similar for any relationship, whether you're dating or engaged or married. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're always looking at ways to stay connected and to deepen your relationship. But I think it's really important for those dating couples to still find things that you can do together. Mm-hmm. And you have to be a little bit creative about this because different deployment scenarios allow for different amounts of communication. But there have been times when we've been able to each read the same book. And it could be even something that you buy before the deployment. So if there's no technology available, at least, he has books to read and we can share and discuss the book in our letters or in our emails. And that gives you kind of something to talk about. You could do the same thing with a Bible study together. And then when people have video access, I think sometimes it's a little tricky. You can fall into the trap of loving the FaceTime and the Skype sessions so much that you don't want them to end, even when you're just kind of staring at each other with nothing to say. And so you have to find ways to keep up the conversation and, actually be connecting meaningfully. So some people just choose to watch movies together where you can start it at the same time, and just be sharing a movie like it's a normal Friday night over Skype. And we also or at least I try to on my end, because I'm home with the kids all the time. And of course he doesn't get to see them and talk to them as much during deployment. I always try and kind of store up those memories and those moments and photos that I want to share with him. So whether we are connecting every day or whether it's only once a week, that I have at my fingertips, if we're just going to have a 5-minute conversation, I know I'm going to tell him about the funny thing that the little one said and the great thing that happened at school. And, I'm just going to give him those highlights because I've been ready and waiting to share them. Yeah,
that's great. And I think, too, just be prepared that you can get cut off even if you have a great connection. It can just go to crap in a second. And all of a sudden they've dropped. And our son, so we were able to video chat with him a couple of times. And sometimes the connection would just be awful. And then there's this big lag. And it's hard to have a conversation like that. It kind of can become a joke. But I know they have a 2-year-old. One thing he did, she didn't always want to stay on there. So this was really cute. They started using Facebook Messenger where you can put the little things overlay over your face. So he'd have a clown face or something and she would just be mesmerized. So that's how they connected through the deployment with the littlest one. It was entertaining for her. Just straight, FaceTiming, she'd get bored and wander off. And
it is definitely frustrating with the kids because that's all that my little ones wanted to do too was, touch the screen and change the effects and look, it's snowing in the background and look, he's breathing fire. And we're like, great. Yeah. Daddy's calling us from China so that he can breathe fire. Awesome.
Yes.
But I think it's also important some people fall into the trap of only having those conversations when the kids are around. Every time you have Skype, oh, look, Daddy's on the phone. Let's all talk to Daddy at once. And you need to have time as a couple without the kids where you're having conversations going on. So we would do a lot of ours either through Messenger or through Google Hangouts.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, that was a good one during his Afghanistan deployments. And I could be having essentially a texting conversation with him throughout the day while I was getting kids ready for school or while they were eating lunch or whatever it was. They weren't necessarily involved in the conversation, and we could be talking about normal adult things without the kids really interrupting.
Or all the behavior problems you want to tell them about.
Yep, that
you can't really say in front of. Well, and I think that also leads to another question because I've heard different advice, and of course I have my own perspective, is you don't want to overload them with all the bad news. But then on the other hand, especially if you've been married a long time, or if you just you have good communication, sometimes they need to know some of the bad things that are going on. So how do you find that balance between keeping them informed versus just dumping on them when you only have a few minutes?
Yeah, and that is definitely tough, and it does depend on the amount of communication you have during the deployment. So I think during some of our earlier ones, when he would only call me once a month, I was not going to take up that time with, oh, the dishwasher's broken.
Yeah, right.
That's just not worth it, because it's something that I know I'm going to end up handling on my own.
Right.
And it's just going to make him feel helpless and frustrated and wish that he could do something about it. So I think there has to be a little bit of consideration for, if I share this information with my spouse, A, is it going to help me at all? Can they offer me some realistic advice or tips? And B, is it going to upset them? And sometimes, I'm not going to say always, because it definitely depends on the type of news, but sometimes it is better to share it after the fact and be like, hey, the dishwasher broke, but guess what? I fixed it and it wasn't too expensive. Done deal. That way you're unloading a little bit. You're getting to vent about the frustrating situation, but you're not burdening them with that stress as well, because they know that it's been handled and taken care of.
And if you send an SOS every time something little happens, I don't advise that. I don't think that's helpful, because by the time they can respond to it, it's probably all taken care of. And it just adds stress to their lives. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, I think you do need to have friends and family members that you can vent to, someone besides your spouse or your significant other. And I know that for so many people, their service member is their person. That is your favorite person to talk to, your favorite person to share everything with. And on one hand, you want to keep up that connection. But when they are out of the country and they can't be there for you, physically and emotionally and everything, then they can't always be your person. And so there has to be someone else that, if you're having a bad day, is there not a girlfriend or someone that you can chat with, or even just, share a text message exchange of like, I had a rough day, and they can say, oh, too bad. But then you're not burdening your spouse every single time.
Yeah. And I think too, I'm just having these feelings come back, because my husband retired. And so we don't face this again as a couple. Of course, we just did with our child, which is a whole different, that's a whole different feeling. That feeling when they've left, they are pretty much unreachable. You're on your own. They're on another continent. That feeling is, if you haven't been through it, it's just so empty. Like, I can't reach out to that person that's most important in my life. Right. And I think even my husband's last one, which was for a year in Afghanistan, I kind of was ready for that, but it's still it's like a punch in the gut. Like, well, I'm facing.
I feel like it's just a huge hole that you kind of walk around with a month at a time.
The deployment grief. So honestly, and then with that last one, I remember, so we were coming towards the end of that deployment. We would be PCSing when he got back from overseas to overseas. And we knew like all these big changes were coming, and we were a little smug. I remember thinking, we've got this. We'd been married over 20 years, over 25 years by that point. I was like, we've got this. We have done this. We know that we know how to do this. Right. And we still had reintegration issues just because we had been apart for a year, and a lot of things, I think it's just normal. So for more seasoned spouses who may be coming up on, their 5th or 10th or whatever deployment, what would your advice be to them, even if they feel like they know what's coming? So for me, I would say just walk a mile in each other's shoes, because it's very easy to kind of become self-centered. So to kind of look at it from their perspective. But what else would you say to more seasoned spouses coming up on a deployment? I
would say first that every deployment is different. And so even though, like I said, we went through our 7th last year, there were new challenges in that one that we hadn't dealt with before. And I know I can relate to what you're saying, that feeling that like, we've done this, we should be good at this by now. But
I wrote a book.
Right? Like, I get paid to write about this stuff, but it doesn't really get easier. I think you do get stronger. You do learn your coping mechanisms and routines and whatever's going to work for your family. And you have to kind of trust yourself to lean into that, even when the deployment situation might be different, or it's immediately followed by a PCS or some type of stressful event. You definitely want to be adaptable, but also lean on your prior experience of knowing what works, and be willing to try new things too, because a lot of our deployments have been at different bases and different locations. And so the resources that I used for childcare or through the unit at one place, we would go to another base and find out that that didn't exist. And we'd start all over.
Yeah. Or your kids are a totally different age. And so it's a whole different thing.
Right.
Compared to maybe what you went through a few years before.
For sure. Having babies and toddlers, it was totally different from having school-age kids. And some of it was easier and some of it was harder. So just because I had done it before with a newborn, which you'd think would be like the most challenging situation. I had 3 kids, ages 3 and under, during one of his deployments, and that was crazy.
Yeah.
But then for his more recent deployments, I had 4 kids, ages like 9 and under, and that was a whole other gamut of emotional issues and school problems and, you know, social drama.
Right. I don't think there's a good age to have a parent deployed. Every age will have a challenge. It's hard for them, no matter if they can talk about it or if they're a toddler and don't have a clue what just happened. That probably will be something we talk about in a couple of months as far as military kids go and deployments, just helping those different ages. But yeah, you're right. So like kids' ages, the location, it's a whole different thing if your spouse deploys and you're living overseas versus if you were a few hours drive from your hometown. Those are very different scenarios. So I think that's really good advice to remember, because even if you feel like, you know, yes, it's different. It's going to be different, and give yourself some grace too. Even if you feel like you should know. So if you know a seasoned spouse going through a deployment, don't forget to reach out to them, because they still need it. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, people think that you get good at it and that it gets easier. And I don't think it's really easier. It's just more a matter of we've been through it before and we know what to expect, and we've gotten stronger. Right. But it's still, you're just as lonely. It's just as difficult. It's just as painful, you know.
Right.
You're just better at juggling, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I know that you have quite a few deployment resources, so let's talk about that, where listeners can find those and what you've got going on.
Sure. Well, first, I'm excited to announce that I am doing a free session in February. This is all happening on my private deployment group on Facebook. And it's a mini masterclass just focused on deployment communication. So we are going to spend a whole week unpacking some of the things that we touched on today with videos and discussion questions, and just kind of addressing what are the deployment communication challenges that people are facing and what are some creative solutions that they've found for dealing with that. So
wonderful.
That can be found through my Seasoned Spouse website. It's free to enroll. It's free to participate. I just want to give people a place to share those challenges and kind of get some strength and some encouragement. And then I have a larger ongoing program that I call the Deployment Masterclass. And this one is a paid subscription. It's just a one-time fee. And it is a collection of, I think I have a dozen seasoned military spouses that we've done video interviews on some of the major deployment challenges that people face. Everything from raising kids during a deployment to how to handle care packages to easy meals to prepare. We just tried to cover a variety of topics that were coming up again and again. And with that is included a bunch of downloadable guides and resources and checklists so that you can feel a lot more confident and prepared going into a deployment.
Now, is that something that then, so when I hear masterclass, is that something they are going into with other people, or is it more of a self-paced kind of thing?
It's both. I wanted it to be available all the time because everyone's deploying on different schedules. So they can enroll in the masterclass at any time and they get instant access to those videos and those downloadable resources. But it also includes free participation in my Facebook group, which is right now over 1,000 military spouses and significant others.
Oh, wow.
All going through deployments right now. And so it's extremely encouraging and relevant information. You know, if you have a deployment question, whether it's specific to a branch or a location, someone in that group is going to have been through that and can give some advice.
Oh, that's wonderful. So they have to sign up for the masterclass to be put into the Facebook group that's discussing it, correct?
Yes.
Not necessarily.
not necessarily. I mean, I prefer that they do it that way, but ultimately the Facebook group can be joined. Like I said, the mini masterclass is going to be run through that Facebook group, and that is free.
Okay.
So we welcome everyone to the Facebook group, but the all the rest of the resources that can be downloaded and the videos that can be watched, I would encourage them to consider signing up for that.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well, wonderful. I'm so excited that you're doing that. I think it's amazing. I have met Lizann a couple of times in person, so she's amazing and as nice as she sounds.
Thank
so I
you.
think that you just, go sign up, go to her site, just dig in. And if you're needing any kind of military life support, just go there. And like you said, your Facebook group, which is very active. Is there anything else you wanted to add to this discussion, Lizann?
I just wanted to give a big shout out and a virtual hug to anyone who's facing an upcoming deployment.
Yeah.
Yes, it's definitely difficult and it's intimidating and it's stressful, but I want you to know that there are people who want to encourage you and support you through it. You definitely do not need to go through it alone.
Right.
And like I said, there's already 1,000 spouses on my page who are going through it and ready to encourage you if you're having a bad day. So do not feel alone. I want everyone to feel loved and supported during a deployment.
Yes, go find that supportive community. That's so great. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your amazing resources for military families, Lizann. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I really love talking with you.
And remember, you can find more from Lizann at her blog, which is seasonspouse.com, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest. She's all over the place. So until next time, thanks for joining us, everybody, and hope you have a great week.
Connect with Jen at jenmcdonald.net or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also purchase her book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. Love the show? Don't forget to leave a review on iTunes. Until next time, have a great week.